I think it's important that we have the moment to talk about our finances and where we are. And it's important that we do this while we talk about stewardship. So there's a caveat on everything today, which is I know that there are some people who receive statements and they didn't look like what statements looked like last year. And that's a pretty normal thing given that we had a long time person who was doing the financial operations in JP Arosa. And JP is incredibly gifted. And JP would often take reports that our system can produce and do a lot of work by hand and with Excel to make much prettier, much easier to read reports than what our current system could do. That's not something that we're able to replicate without JP. And so we are at the cusp of a new finance software that will hopefully make much more readable finance reports, but they're never going to look the way they were with JP. And so the diocese is very lucky to have JP. But please do be in touch. Sherry Bertram, who is our business administrator, is doing really good work and is making herself very available to respond to questions. But it was with Sherry's help that these numbers, I'm very confident in terms of where we are. We're getting financial reporting every month now. That was not always the case before. And Sherry's really dedicated to making sure that happens. So as we get started, I want to say thank you to Sherry and thank you all for your patience as Sherry takes on the big shoes that JP left to fill. So let's say a prayer, and then Kathy and I can talk about stewardship, and we'll talk about the various pictures in the bulletins. I'm gonna have to tell that not to fall asleep. So the Lord be with you.
And also with you.
Let's pray. Gracious and loving one, we give you thanks for the generosity that has been entrusted to this place, for the way that St. Michael's puts our dollars into action, caring for those in need, taking care of our neighbors. Be with us this stewardship season. Give us grace, give us patience, and give us courage as we seek to follow you even with our finances. In Christ's name we pray. Amen. So I wonder if Kathy, where's Kathy saying? There she is, you're in the front row. Kathy, could you say a word? I know that this chart has been a big surprise to a lot of people, so if you could say a word about that. I'll try to keep the computer from falling asleep.
Okay, sounds good. Hi everyone, I'm Kathy Bailey. I'm chair of the stewardship ministry. We're moving to really think about ourselves as a ministry and not just a committee or subcommittee of vestries. So, it went away.
Well, I'll put it back up.
Okay. It went away.
All right, I'm bringing it back up.
Thank you. So we decided last year, we've done this in the past, so this is not necessarily a new way of seeing the budget and seeing our stewardship efforts. But last year we did do some pie charts. We put them in our updates. And this year we thought it would be a good idea to give a fuller picture of where stewardship stands just at this bleak in time. So we put in some pie charts into our stewardship letter this year that gives you a picture of where stewardship stands. So a lot of people, we've been having conversations as a stewardship team, as a stewardship group, and from those conversations we've been hearing that a lot of people, maybe you too, have been surprised by this number here. This number is not indicative of people not giving. Some people may not be giving, but what we're really seeing here is a lot of people are either givers of record or putting cash in the plate, right? And as that's happening, we are not able to necessarily track that as a pledge.
I love it.
An actual pledge number. So we do count givers of record and we do count plates, but it doesn't necessarily count as a pledge to operating budget. So it's a high number. We would love this number to move and to shift and to change into a less large proportion of what we're seeing in stewardship. And that's the ministry's job, is to move that number and to get that number to shift. Do you want to say?
Yeah, I'll say a word about
Yeah.
So what Kathy's referring to is this 57% of the congregation by the numbers does not pledge. And that can mean a couple of things. So we know that there are about 20 households that are givers of record. And so just under 10% of the folks who are not pledging are giving with a regular pattern and are giving in envelopes or writing checks so we know who they are. We don't know who's giving in cash. I suspect that a number of our pledgers also give cash as well. So there's just no way to count green dollars and who they come from unless they come in an envelope. But there's a couple things to this big pie. One, I think, is a positive thing, which is we tend to be a church that people think of as their church who only come a few times a year. We're a church where people who are exploring faith and who are not quite yet committed to a congregation come. And some of those people are regular enough that they count as households. Whether they pledge is a kind of ministry of the stewardship team to invite people into the work of generosity. But there are pieces that we just need to clear up. We said really specifically in the letter this year, we don't get our money from down. Like the bishop doesn't give us any money. We give the bishop money, right? In other church systems, the finances work really differently. I was with a Roman Catholic colleague yesterday who was like, yeah, we've had to do about $200,000 worth of work on this building since I got here. So the diocese is mad at me because they have to keep writing checks. And I was like, oh, wouldn't that be a different world? Right? So in the Episcopal system, our support all comes from the congregation. And St. Michael's is actually in the top 3 largest contributors to the diocese. We pay 12% of what we receive into the diocese, which is over $125,000 a year. It goes up to the diocese so that they have a budget, because their budget is entirely made up of what comes up from the congregations. So a lot of people just don't understand it. For an Episcopal church to keep running, it can't just be $1 on the plate. There's an education that needs to happen.
And that, I think, reflects the fact that our churches really values the lay contributions to ministry and support. And the Episcopal Church has always been that way. And so our diocese sends money to the wider church. And so it's really a bottom-up kind of way of giving. And so part of our budget, of course, is that. But part of our budget, as you all can see, is really thinking about, and our budget people will talk about this, is really thinking about how we're doing with our ministry and what we need in terms of clergy and staff in order to do that ministry well, and also to support the ministries that are lay-driven, that are really based on an outward model, that we're breaking down the walls of this place and really thinking outside the box here and how we affect our community and affect change in our neighborhood and the wider community of Albuquerque and even the state of New Mexico. So that is really what our job as stewardship is to really start visioning for our future, not just this year in 2025, but thinking about 2026, 2027 and beyond. And so really building capacity within our stewardship work to affect that kind of ministry change. So that's what we're trying to do. And we feel very driven to do that as a team. So I guess, is there anything else we need to say?
I realized this week, if you did the numbers, if the 501 households is right, which I think it's pretty close. Joe did a lot of cleanup of the database in the last few years that he was rector. And we went from, there's a year where it looks like we lost a bunch of members in the national statistic. And really it was Joe went through and cleaned up folks that hadn't been here in a long time. But if we have 501 households as part of the congregation, which seems about right to me, if we kept our average pledge, we'd have a budget of $1.5 million, which would just make a really big difference in how the day-to-day operations of this place would go. So it's just a thing to point out. Are there any questions on pledging? Oh, sorry, Kathy, I cut you off.
Oh, no, that's fine. I just had said to my stewardship group, that our ministry team, that is one of my goals as stewardship chair is to really build that capacity to 1.5 in the next 3 years. It'd be great if we could hit it sooner than that, but realistically, this place, where we live in this place, should be, and looking at wider church statistics, we should be at almost right 5 million. And so that's part of my goal is to help grow that so that we are supporting ministry in a way that we can and that I think we should be doing. Yeah, we got other slide you had?
Yep.
It looks like you're up your budget.
We'll get there in just a second. That's our next step. But
Okay.
let's, if there are any questions on pledging.
Yeah, Bill.
I just have a question. Let's say we have somebody who puts a $20 bill in their plate every Sunday.
Yep.
Would we, and that's wonderful,
Yeah.
but would we really much rather have a pledge for whatever 80 times 12 is? Because, and why is that, Mike? And why do we, what, it's money's money, right?
Money's money, but
Well, I would say that having that pledge card turned in that says I'm giving $20 a week or $20 a month times 12 allows us and finance and vestry and Mike to do the work of planning for the budget for 2026 and beyond. And so if we can kind of, it's like counting our pennies, we know what we have and we know what we are building on for 2026. It gives us a really clear picture of what that budget's going to look like in December, which then goes to the vestry and is approved and then is presented at our annual meeting in January. So I think that the more specific we can be, even if it's just $1 on your pledge card, the more we can really accurately budget. And I don't know about you all, but sometimes organizations will under budget, like they will underestimate what's coming in based on different kinds of numbers they're receiving, and then at the end of the year they're in a surplus state. And what ends up happening when we're in a mindset of scarcity is sometimes we are in sort of this panic modality of, are we going to make our budget? Are we going to make our budget? Are we going to make our budget? The side's falling kind of mentality. That is not where we are at St. Michael's. We're not there. We're really in a good place financially, which finance will talk about. But I think that really thinking about our mindset as one of abundance and generosity, and then saying, how can I quantify what I'm giving? A lot of people, I know this for 730, this is true, pledge and then put more in the plate, which is fine. I think that's great. But it would be really good too if we just knew exactly what kind of money was coming in. Yes, Judith.
I was just thinking that so the answer to both questions, if I account on what my retirement on my social security was yearly month, I could be in the almost end off with what it is like I turn spend off.
yeah,
Really saying our own lives to this
it's
Well,
yeah.
I think it's discerning.
It's
Right?
just-
We have to discern for ourselves what is our personal budgets, right? What do we live on each month, and then from there, we know how much groceries to buy and what our utilities are going to be, and all of that sort of discernment process goes into our family budgeting. But I would love us to sort of say, as well as all of that, we think about what do we give to this faith community that is so important to us. So that's part of why in the letter it said really talk about this and discern what it is that you can give. Yes.
So I was really shocked by the 70%.
Yep.
Bill. Are those people that have their credentials here, or are they?
So, so yeah, as I said at the beginning, St. Michael's is a pretty wide open community of faith, right? But these are people who are known to the congregation, participate enough that they haven't become inactive in the congregation. But we have out of our households 285, so slightly more than half, who are neither pledging nor are giving in a sustained pattern. Now,
They have their credentials here, they're not, so stop.
so that's a tricky, memberships numbers in the Episcopal Church are really tricky. So that's one of the things that Joe did. So in the Episcopal Church, full membership, communicants in good standing, means that you are either confirmed or received as an Episcopalian. Your your letter of membership is at the church, so that's the credentials one, and that you have been to communion at least 3 times in a given year. So Christmas, Easter, and at least one more time, right? But we actually have some of the tightest kind of like definitions of that of any denomination.
Yeah.
This may not be quite that, but Joe did a lot of cleanup. He did really pare back the number of people we were counting as active members to folks that he knew who they were. And as we've been adding folks in, newcomers and such, we've not been adding folks as active members until they're actively participating in the life of this place. But as I said at the outset, we do have a lot of people coming from other traditions where giving may look really different. Sometimes we benefit from that because we get good evangelicals that give 10% of their income, right? Because that was part of the culture they grew up with. And sometimes when we get good Catholics who put $1 in the plate every week, there's some education involved in terms of how finances work in our denomination.
But I think that's part of all of our responsibility as members of St. Michael's is to really have conversations about why we put the card in the box, right? Why we mail in our pledge card, why we sign up online and do it. Because I think this part of it is about, and I'm just gonna put it out there, this is about building relationships with folks, right? It is about, and that's our charge as stewardship, is getting to know who this group is, and then having some conversations with those folks about the importance of a pledge and being a member and engaging. And I think one of the things that's really exciting is that Michaelmas Sunday is next Sunday, and it's been shown statistically that the more you're engaged in a place, engaged in meaningful ministry every week in some capacity, you're more likely to move from here to here. Meaningful engagement meaning, not always just showing up on a Sunday morning, but really getting involved in a ministry, getting engaged in some way where you feel like what you're contributing to the community is important, your time and talent, but also your treasure. So that's why I think next week is so important. I think having that time to engage with members of our parish who might not be engaged in ministry is so important, and being joyful about that.
Yeah.
Right?
The other thing I'll say that is atypical about St. Michael's is among our pledgers. There's a beautiful thing that happens. A pledge is most technically, a minimum estimate of giving, right? It's an estimate of giving, but a good number of people at St. Michael's, flat maybe an overestimate, but a good number of people at St. Michael's treat it as a minimum estimate of giving. And so one of the reasons that we tend to outperform our budget is we don't take a discount on pledges. We plug in what has been pledged. And the last several years, we have outperformed what we have said, what the pledges have been. We have a fair number of people that is just realistic for their income. Their income isn't a steady 12-month paycheck. They may, have a legal career where their income comes when cases get through. They may have a sales job where, it's just an uneven thing. And so people do a minimum estimate of giving, and then they give more than that. And that has been part of and learning how that works and things like that will help us do better with budgeting for pledging, but almost every other church I know of has to take a 5 or 10% discount on the pledges to plug into the budget. St. Michael's does the opposite. It's like 5 or 10% above the last several years, which is a beautiful thing.
Gene, I feel just at the end, one of the advantages of budgeting would be at the end of the year, give statement for your taxes.
Mm-hmm.
And, yeah, so that's really handy for me when I get all my papers together, but I got St. Michael's there.
Yep. And we're legally required to do that, so you will always get a statement of all of your charitable gifts through the year.
Coffees.
Any other questions on pledging? Then we're going to let your treasurer and assistant treasurer take over.
Okay. For those who don't know, I'm Evelyn Hanneman. I've been treasurer. This is my third year, on the end of my third year. And I have to say that after 3 years, I think I'm beginning to understand the finances of the church. But I want to start with the good news. Jack and I always make certain that we know at almost every finance committee meeting that the church is debt-free. That is not the norm for many churches. But I checked with Barbara Koenig, and in September of 2018, they burned the mortgage. So they made a big push starting in the Easter that year to get rid of the last $300,000, and they did. So that also shows the financial health of the people who are gathered in the church to be able to come up with $300,000 like that. The other thing that is good to note is that we used to have a line of credit. And JC told me that every year they had to use that line of credit in the wintertime to pay off the expenses that got worse in the winter. And then had to trade the interest on line of credit and so forth. We have not done that since I got on board. And not done it for a number of years before that, again, because of the help of the community out of line. So that's has been a very good thing, and I think we need to start with the good news that we are in very good shape. So, Jim, you were going to say a few things.
Hi, I'm Jim Moffett. I was treasurer of the 2006 at the 2017. Every investor Then I usually became assistant treasurer here to help with a little historical background from it. And the thing I want to say about pledging is that pledging is a commitment, and boy, do we not like that word commitment. It's sort of always, people are going a little scared of it. But this commitment is our faith. Our faith is revealed in this commitment. I don't know if there's still an Episcopal canon saying that if you could be a member only if you pledged.
No, you're right. That's the one thing I miss. You don't have to pledge, but you have to be a giver of record.
Okay.
So you have to have given in such a way that we can track who you are. Pledging is the easiest way, but there are 20 other households that give regularly. We know who they are, so they would count too.
But the act of a pledge is a sign of faith, is a sign of commitment to the work of Jesus. And we kind of pussyfoot around the idea of commitments, and it's a scary word that we don't use very much. But I think I was surprised also by the number of non-pledgers when we got that letter. And I think it's time to spread the good word, because pretty much everybody in this room is a pledger already. Yeah. But it's time to spread the word that if you want to grow in faith, then make this pledge. It's not really all about being counted, although I made good money for my career being a bean counter. It's about faith. It's about expressing our commitment and our love for the work of this church, for the people in this church. And that's why, to me, it's important. I mean, budgeting is very helpful and all that, but the commitment of our members is what makes the whole thing run.
Thank you.
That's not all
Thank you.
Thanks, Jim.
Thanks, Jill.
It's been wonderful having Jim on the finance committee because he's got that history, long history, that helps us understand why we're here, what we're doing. I just wanted to speak to a few things on the budget. You'll notice that clergy and staff salaries are really high. And so often people.
I wouldn't call them high. Percentage-wise, they make up a large part of our budget.
One of the things that I worked for nonprofits all my life, and one of the things that I had to do was keep track of what I was doing, and I wore 3 hats. So I always had to keep track of what was this phone call for, and was it more than 15 minutes, and keep track of 15-minute blocks. Almost like a lawyer, I suppose, but we were not quite as specific as lawyers, I guess, have to be. But what that meant is that when we did this kind of a breakout, we showed that I maybe spent, 3 hours with the land that we owned, and that was administration indeed, but I was also doing restorative justice, which was program. So if I spent 3 hours on the land, but then 4 hours on restorative justice, that went into the program budget. And our auditor always wanted us to take those figures and then to be able to break that big block down into this is program and this is administration. I know for the staff here, that would be pretty impossible to do, just because of the way ministers and ministry happens. So when we look at that and we think, oh, administration, no, that's our ministry. Because just as what else do we have up here? Upkeep and insurance. If we don't have the buildings, if we don't keep the buildings up, if we don't pay the insurance on the buildings, that means that part of what our ministry is, which is use of the buildings, is perhaps going to fall down around our ears. I've been coming to the new members class. We've been here for 5 years, and I decided it was time to learn about the Episcopalian, because I'm an American Baptist. And why do we do the liturgy? But other than that, it's fascinating being here and seeing all the cars. And people on Mondays, where my husband's doing the Enneagram class, people come in and say, I can't find a parking space. Well, there's not that many in the class. And so it's the use of the buildings by the Gay Men's Chorus, by a variety of other groups, a lot of AA groups up here. So that's part of our ministry. Our ministry is not just the little pieces that we may be involved in personally, but it's a whole lot. Another thing about the small amount that is outreach here, which does have the asterisks up here, one of the ways that and JP was doing it, and he knows it with the at the diocese now. A lot of churches get their money for their ministries outside of their budget. And that's what we also do. We have a lot of people who give regularly to the food pantry, a lot of people who give to Las Familias, to immigration, and so forth. And that's outside of our budget, which means that doesn't count in our fair share.
Which is what we pay the diocese.
Which is what we pay the diocese, at $125,000. But we do pay, but we do support those ministries very well. In some cases, I know for a food pantry, at times they say, you've got a lot of money, why don't you buy some more food? So we do. So those are the kinds of ministries that the church has that don't necessarily show up in the specifics of the budget. And I think that it's really important to keep that in mind, that just the fact that we're here, for many people is important. And they don't come in the door, but just knowing that we're here can be very important as well.
And it is legal what we're doing. I mean,
Right, yes,
In
yes.
fact, it's following, because those gifts come with a donor designation for a
Right.
specific ministry, we
Right.
couldn't give 12% of that to the diocese. We have to spend it on that specific ministry. And so that is why, but it does make the budget a little different, because if we were only doing $7,250, it would look like just a tiny bit of our budget was going into supporting our neighbor, when it's much closer to 20% of the budget is going into direct service to people in need.
Right. And that, I think, is money that we do actually get to specific outreach ministries. So I think FaithWorks
FaithWorks.
and so forth are things that we do support from the budget. But a lot of the sort of more in-house ministries are ones that people give to dedicated funds, so that it goes specifically to that and is kept that way. Okay, I think Bruce was going to sort of tie things up.
Sure. Michael spoke about fair share, what that represents for us as part of the Episcopal Church. Just like we're trying to determine our budget to our pledges, the church also needs to know what's going on within each diocese. What commitment can we receive? It used to be called the asking, and now it is called fair share, and it's more mandatory than a can you do this? It's what you have to do as a member of the Episcopal Church in the U.S. So we have an obligation, not just to our diocese, but also to the church at large. They have ministries across the U.S. and worldwide as well, not just what we do here in New Mexico, but what they're trying to do as a church supports the entire church mission. So our commitment through the payment of fair share to the diocese, which then makes a payment up to the U.S. church, is what we're trying to fulfill. So that fair share, as Jim spoke to, it's our faith in action. It's our ministry to fellow humans. So we've got New Mexico, we've got Albuquerque, we've got our local community, but we also have to think about the church at large and what we're trying to do in the world. So don't think about fair share as like a tax. It's just part of what we have to do. We want to be part of the church. The church is doing good things. This is how we support them. So are there any questions about?
Can I say a word about that?
Sure.
So historically, this piece, the fair share, has been a little bit tricky for St. Michael's. There was a period of time when the diocese was not paying to the Episcopal Church, the wider church, because the bishop here at the time didn't support the Episcopal Church's stance on consecrating an openly gay bishop, on moving toward marriage equality. St. Michael's went around our diocese to keep paying to support the wider Episcopal Church. What's beautiful in recent years, we've consistently paid into the diocese, and the diocese has changed a great deal. One of the churches that receives money each year to stay open, because it's in a tiny community without a lot of Episcopalians, is the Episcopal Church in Raton. The Episcopal Church in Raton, the last 2 years, has been the organizing body for Pride Raton. Last year, David Martin went up there for their Pride celebration and ended up accidentally the Grand Marshal of the Pride Parade. And that church and the ministry that happens there is only able to happen because churches like St. Michael's give a portion of what we do to keep the Episcopal Church operating in places like Raton. And so our relationship with our diocese has changed a lot. And I know some of us are playing catch up with that emotionally. But David Martin is still sometimes like, I can't believe I was the Grand Marshal in Raton because the Episcopal Church there said, come on up. But it's a different world. And now that piece is about keeping ministry like that happening.
I find this graph a little confusing.
Yeah.
Because the year-to-date kind of represents, 7 months worth of spending, and then we kind of project. So you kind of want to look at what we did in July and compare it to what we do in 20. Are we on track? And I don't think that's exactly what this is trying to represent. But my question is the diocese pledge is 75,000. I mean, are we done for this year? We've given everything we need to?
No, the diocese
No.
pledge. So the budget for 24 is 125,000.
Oh, okay.
This
All
is slightly past half.
right. Okay.
Because we're slightly past halfway through the year.
Confused. I was thinking 2025.
And we do it
this
monthly.
year. Yeah.
And it's a monthly pledge.
Okay.
And it actually adjusts depending on how
Okay.
we're actually performing. My previous diocese, you calculated based on 2 years ago, which was always tricky because if you had a really bumper year 2 years ago and you had a couple of pledgers that moved out of town, you were always kind of going, wait. But every diocese does that piece just a little bit differently.
So is it a strict percentage that we have to give? Or
Yeah.
does that
It's a straight
change
percentage.
every year?
Well, it
Okay.
can change. The diocesan council can recommend a new budget to the convention, and then the convention votes on the budget. So if the convention were to vote on a different percentage, it could change, but it hasn't in several years.
So it usually goes up.
Try to budget 3 years at a time, kind of like the government, they think, what's
Yeah.
happening this year, next year, and 2 years out.
Right.
That's the same type of budgeting that the church does.
I do want to just say something about the wider church. So at General Convention this year, there were resolutions that came to the floor. One was to lower the percentage that dioceses have to give to the wider church at a number of 10%. That resolution did not pass, but we did elect a bishop-elect, presiding Bishop Rowe, who's our new bishop-elect, who will be become presiding bishop in January after he's consecrated at the National Cathedral.
He'll be consecrated or he's
Oh,
consecrated,
sorry,
but
in
he'll
New
start
York.
office in New York in the tiny
Then-
little office.
Right,
yeah.
and then he'll take office at the National Cathedral and the big ceremony there. But what has happened at the wider church level is that there have been ongoing conversations around how we as a church give and where those resources are allocated back to dioceses that need it. Our diocese, as you all probably know, like Raton, like places like Arabian Valley, if we're looking down at Berlin, Socorro, TRC, if we're looking out east in places like Ruidoso, Carrizozo, Roswell, all of those communities are churches that have struggled in the past, but have a lot of support from the diocese to really improve and do better at what they're doing, and therefore the fair share is going up, and they're able to pay. A lot of those communities now are paying their fair share. But a lot of that has been a result of direct support from the diocese. So we are a diocese that's looking at how we do outreach, how we support our communities that are declining in number, not just the church populations, but the community populations as well. So as communities are suffering economic adversity, their population is declining, and therefore the Episcopal Church's population is also declining. So how we support those communities in ways that are meaningful for them is important. And I just want to say something before we close. Someone brought, Jim said it so beautifully, but part of why I give was because, and I can't always say it in words, because the language of the heart isn't always a verbal language. It's how it's a heart language. Pledging is a heart language, and it is about how do I connect my spiritual journey to the journey in this place, and why I give is because I want, after I go, I want that spiritual journey to continue for others and to be fortunate. And what Christ is calling me to do is to support the ministries of this place. And I think why I was called to this place is that Jesus is alive and well in this community, and that the way of love is alive and well in this people. And what we do here is something I've never seen, and I've seen a lot of parishes across the church. And I think we are uniquely poised to make a difference, and we make differences all the time in our neighborhood, in our city, in our state, and in the wider community of the church. And one of the things that I've seen at the wider church is I have people come up to me when I have my little badge on for Diocese of the Rio Grande, and they say, "Oh, wow, I've heard about your diocese, what a great place to be." And we are part of that conversation. So St. Michael's is known at the wider level, and it's also known in the local level. So I hope our ministers of finance are doing such a great job, and I just hope that you will pray and think about, we don't like to say the E word, evangelism, but that is really what we're
Thank you.
So, to Sherry's point, I just wanted to show this was one of the drafts of what we had, you can tell it's a draft because we have outreach and fellowship switched there. But it's always tricky to show how we're trying to represent a very complex budget in 2 pictures, right? So you can see on this one of the things that people said was confusing is the pie chart doesn't correspond to your percentages. No, because these are percentage of the budget used so far. What's really helpful to know are the bottom lines. We're right about, I think it's like 59% of the year is where you are in July. And we're right about there in terms of budget. We're keeping to budget. We're right about there in terms of pledging. Overall, though, we're way ahead on income. We're at 71%. Part of that has to do with additional income. And some of that additional income is not just pledge payments. There's additional donations that have happened. We receive income on the cash balance that we have that allows us to keep doing ministry rather than having a line of credit. We have a cash balance that is a cushion, and interest rates have been favorable. And so it's a really complex budget. But one of the places I'm happy, we outpace our outreach budget by 600%, which has to do with that complicated thing of outreach that we were talking about before. But there are really complex ways to show. We could even go more complex than this. But part of what we're trying to do is showing that we and by August, we'd actually significantly shrunk our operating deficit. One of the things, we're not here by July yet really realizing savings in staff salary. At the end of July, we'd had a couple of months without JP, but Mandy worked to the end of July. James was with us to the end of July. Thankfully, we have a new sexton starting tomorrow. So we're not realizing the staff savings yet. What we're seeing is income is outpacing expectations, and so that is really helping us stay. We're not really in the black, but it keeps us within a percentage or so of our budget expenses, which is good news. But the way we've been doing budgeting doesn't really allow for us to plan for growth. If what we're projecting is a huge deficit all the time, then it makes it difficult for us to say, well, what is the next thing we want to do? If we're always saying, we're going to realize this deficit, it makes it hard for us to dream about what's the next ministry we want to launch. And so we are doing work to reset our budgeting so that we're closer to actuals and we're not projecting big deficits that we don't realize, which is what we've done the last several years, but it'll put us in a better place in terms of being able to say, this is what we want to do next. And your willingness to contribute, your willingness to consider if you're able to increasing your pledge, if you've never pledged before, pledging will also help us be in that place. If we were able to pass a surplus budget for 2025, it would put us in the place of saying, what is the next thing we want to do? Hopefully with new clergy joining the staff, what are their dreams? What are we hearing from the congregation that we want to be able to do together in the years ahead? I think we do that a couple of ways, by doing our budgeting process a little bit differently, so we're not projecting deficits we don't realize, but also by making headwinds when it comes to these big numbers of people that we're not hearing from in the pledge season, and helping people that are pledging just a little bit and could be pledging more, that it wouldn't represent a financial hardship, helping them also understand what their giving could mean and how far it goes at a place like St. Michael's.
I just wanted to say
Evelyn.
one thing. Mike said that we're saving money because we haven't replaced JT and Mandy yet. And yeah, we're saving money, but the pressure on Mike at times I think is fairly atrocious, frankly. And that we need to be aware that there's one thing to save money and there's another thing to save our staff. And so I'm very happy that we're hiring, I think, someone to do.
We're in early interview processes.
But there's possibilities on down the line. And in the past, we have said, oh, we've saved money during COVID and so forth. Staff left, we didn't get interims, whatever. Not the way to take care of your staff. So raising your pledge is the way to take care of your staff.
All right.
Good stuff.
Anything else question-wise?
Good.
We really appreciate it. And will you help me thank your stewardship chair and your finance committee for their presentation?